Hello and welcome everyone to this afternoon's session on permission. Specifically, how do we build a culture of permission and support for calculated risk-taking? I'm Joe Torgerson. I'm Head of Innovation in the Modernisation and Reform Unit in the Cabinet Office. Delighted to be chairing this panel this afternoon. We've got an expert panel with us today, and we're going to be unpacking a range of themes, but namely, how do we foster a culture where staff can feel empowered to raise their head above the parapet if they have a good idea without fear of reprisal? And how do we then support them to take an idea from inception to implementation? We've got 50 minutes today, and we've got a rather large panel, so I'm going to be doing the quick introductions and then inviting some opening remarks with some themed questions, and then we'll dive straight into a Q&A, keen to make this as participatory as possible. So on to the panel. We've got a bit of a different balance for you this afternoon, ranging from the very tops of office to experts at the front line who've been there and done it. So starting at my left, we have Kirsten Teasdale, who's a senior partner at EY Canada, now leading EY's public sector work. She's a former government minister, and so has perspective from both the administrative and political sides. Gareth Weiss-Williams is HMG's Chief Commercial Officer. As well as huge commercial expertise, he oversaw the UK's ventilator challenge, designing, producing, and supplying vital medical equipment during the pandemic. Sapna Agarwal is the director leading the Modernisation and Reform Unit in Cabinet Office. Formerly at McKinsey, she has substantial insight into the decision-making and structures at the heart of government through which permission is sought. Dr. James Waddell is the administration officer in the Drivers Vehicle and Licensing Agency, who recently set up a grassroots community of practice for junior civil servants working in operation delivery. Sarah Ward is a collaborations and engagement manager in the Department for Levelling Up Communities and Housing. She helped set up the first innovation squad in her department, supporting teams to solve and seize opportunities with speed and efficiency. And finally, Rupert Cryer runs the Innovation Unit in Government Legal Department. He won EY's Dragon Dens Award, and with Policy School and Skyrooms, he's taken his ideas through to implementation, so brings the proven experience to making grassroots innovation happen. So to kick off, can I please ask Kirsten, Gareth, and Sapna to set out what you think the big topics here are from a board-level perspective, and what role leaders play in inspiring a culture of innovation.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And I know we had tough competition for this spot today, so thanks for all showing up. When we think about transformation, and I've had the chance to spend my career really on both sides of that, and we look at what makes large programs fail and what allows governments to attain the outcomes that they're looking for, it boils down, when you cut away all the chaff, it really boils down to leadership and culture. And if we can actually get that right, and that's really hard things to change, actually. It's easier to change the technology, it's easier to change policies, it's easier to change processes, but changing the way that leaders show up and changing the culture that they enable is difficult stuff. But so worth the effort. We did a big study with Oxford, and I think this very much has been enforced by our own practical experience. There's 3 or 4 fundamental things that I think they have to get right. We have to get right in order to enable this change. First of all, and people talk about empowerment and delegation, and you're all going to nod your heads. It's important. It's very hard to do within our hierarchical structures in government, for one thing. But it's not enough to delegate. When we say supportive delegation and authority, we mean you need to provide the context and leadership to support those teams, and we need to provide the budget and the resources for them to actually get the important work done that they need to do. So often we give the delegation, but how often do we really put the budget and the resourcing levers in the hands of the teams in order to get the work done? So leaders in this context, they need to set the vision, they need to set the what you want to attain, and then you need to empower and support the teams around how they're going to get there. And that's going to mean a myriad of decisions, and it's still going to mean a lot of engagement from leadership. But you need to be able to get out of the way a little bit and let the horses run and support them as they do. So how do we do that? There's a couple of other things that kind of are necessary for that environment. One is psychological safety. When you try things for the first time, when you innovate, you're bound to not get it all right 100% of the time. So we must create an environment where people are allowed to make mistakes, and hopefully not massive mistakes, but sometimes they might be massive mistakes. But if we haven't tried and we don't actually measure the environment to allow people to actually try and fail and sometimes celebrate those failures, we're not going to get it. And this means being authentic, and it means leaders not distancing themselves when their team stumbles, but actually leaning in and supporting them and then figuring out what went wrong and then moving everybody forward without a lot of recrimination. And that sort of brings us to that courageous leadership element here, or leaders need to be working on themselves. So we are all works in progress when it comes to our leadership skills, and we need to really foster that. We need to show up when it counts, and we need to be able to lean into the tough problems. Again, we know when a team hits a deadline or doesn't hit a deadline or is struggling with something, or something blows up in the newspaper, or the minister's office gets ticked off about something, where's leadership? Leadership needs to be right in there, and they need to be protecting the team, and they need to be educating up and out about what their team is trying to attain. So that leadership role is fundamentally important. And then finally, I would say, embedding a culture of constructive challenge. So we need to create the environment that teams can have vigorous and healthy debate without repercussions. Just because somebody more senior walks in the room, we can't be nodding our heads, right? We have to allow ourselves to be challenged, and we have to encourage and hold our teams to account for challenging each other, because that's the only way that we're going to get better. And so when you combine those things, the safety, the constructive challenge, the courageous leadership, and then the support that wraps around it, you can start to get the behavioral change that we need to drive a culture that will actually take risk. And it takes time, and it takes work. And I think it's absolutely worth investing in. And the final point I'd make was, we can kind of create teams in a bubble that can do incredible things, but they're only going to be able to make so much change if we don't actually drive that change up and out. So we're talking about the really hard, messy things to change: the machinery of government, Treasury Board processes, hierarchical governance models, the metrics to how we measure our people. If we're not willing to break some eggs, compensation. We had an issue on a panel on recruitment earlier this morning, and everything was changeable except compensation. If we're not able to talk about those things, then again, it's going to be difficult to make the change happen. So I'll stop there. But those are a few of the lessons that I've learned the hard way.
Yeah. Great. I'd agree with everything Kirsten said. I'd just perhaps emphasize a couple of things. So I run the commercial function, so procurement. First thing, I would talk about on the subject of permission. Give yourself permission when you're asking for something to dream and to think of outcomes. Be adventurous. If you ask your procurement team to get you the same as you got you last time, but slightly cheaper, then they'll do that, and they'll do that brilliantly. If, on the other hand, you say, look, this is the outcome I'm trying to achieve in my policy area, I really want this to be different, I want a different way of skinning this cat, then, you've given them the permission to go off and do that. Outcomes. Second thing is pipelines. If you're buying a product or a service that is going to be delivered by someone external, please put that ask on what's called your pipeline. Every department, and in with the new Procurement Act, I'll come back to you in a minute, that goes live in October, there's a requirement for government to publish pipelines of what we want. These are not guarantees that we're going to place orders for those things. They're pipelines, they're asks. They're your asks if you're working in a policy area. And that allows the market to get itself organized to say, right, they want to solve this problem a different way. I'll put time and effort into thinking about how to do that, so when it comes up, I can bid for it. If we don't do that, then of course, your ask, no matter how genius it is just going to fall flat because no one's going to have seen it coming. They won't be prepared, and you'll end up with the same thing we bought last time, which is, guess what? Not what you want to achieve. So, pipelines. Third thing, I just completely agree with what you say about funding. we need to fix the funding, not just for the development phase, but for the scale-up phase and then the run phase. And that's a question of quantum of pounds, but also time. We've got, Treasury colleagues in the room, pretty please, we've got to allow ourselves to imagine and recognize that innovation takes more than a budget year. Probably if it's worth anything, it's probably more than an SR period. And therefore, we need to be comfortable with the idea that a proper innovation needs multi-SR phasing of timing. We can all think of ghastly examples where we've come up with something brilliant, it's actually worked, the supplier has come up with it, and then, oh drat, end of an SR, sorry, no more money. So everything just goes in the bin. It's just heartbreaking. So if we could give ourselves the organizational permission not to do that, that would be great. And then the last thing for me, really, about permission, and you touched on it, permission to fail. Most innovations fail. My wife works in the food industry. Apparently, 8 out of 10 new products don't survive the first 3 months on the shelves, because guess what? We don't buy them. If an innovation that we're going to come up with is really good, a meaningful innovation, it's going to be in the 8 out of 10 failure rate. So we need to think about innovations in a portfolio sense, because otherwise any one innovation that you come up with or you come up with is likely to fail. And we mustn't chastise you for it, unless you've been crazily negligent, which as diligent civil servants you won't have been. But we need to accept organizationally, Treasury colleagues, that these are more likely to fail than succeed. And the only way, therefore, to look at this is as a portfolio. If we drive up the success of the portfolio, we've won. If we concentrate on the individual project, no one will want to do it for fear of failing. And we can do this. When we look at ventilators, which I was involved with, or vaccines, we took a portfolio approach and we celebrated the fact that we got 4 drugs that worked. We got 5 ventilator designs that worked. That's the right way to think about it. So those are my 4 permissions. Hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Gareth. Sapna?
Great, thank you. And also agree with much of what's been said. I wanted to sort of focus on 4 points: the burning platform, buy-in to your ideas, taking a holistic approach, and diffusion of great ideas. So on burning platform, this morning we heard from our keynote addresses around the size of the problem, and the innovation was the only sort of bridge that we've got. I wanted to add another dimension to that. In 2022, I think, yes, the OECD did a trust survey, and only 40% of the UK population trusted that if they put forward an innovative idea, that departments would make a change to improve public services. This year, the data's from 2023, but we've only just recently got the data, that's dropped by 10%. That's really worrying. And that obviously impacts public trust. So not only is there a sort of a financial issue that we need to sort of to bridge, we also need to keep the public's trust. And many of us are senior civil servants. This is very much in our this is our responsibility. This is part of the stewardship that Alex Chisholm was talking about this morning. Second, I wanted to talk about buy-in. So many of us have to advise ministers, or even if we're not in front of the ministers, we're providing great information to teams that then try and convince ministers of different policy ideas. And sometimes I hear people say, well, it's really hard to persuade the minister to do something innovative. They either want to do something that's happened in another country, they want a safe bet, they're not actually interested in the sort of the vehicle, they just want to say, announce the first step. It's on all of us to explain why innovating is about calculated risk. To build on your 8 out of 10 food products piece, that's exactly right. We're helping ministers deliver the outcome they want by shoring up that that's going to happen through evidence-based risk-taking. The third point I wanted to make is about a holistic approach on innovation. It's a very busy space. As civil servants, we're told to be innovative and creative and data-driven and kind, and I don't know, there's all sorts of things we're being told what to do. it's very busy. And when you want to make a culture change, you want to make a culture change stick, you need to be holistic about it. Gareth, I know, big fan of incentives when it comes to innovation. And what I think I really appreciate about that is when we want to see a culture change, you can't just tell people to be innovative. We need to give them the skills, the tools. We need to sort of performance manage, we need to reward, and we need to show great role modeling of both failure and success. And you have to be holistic, and you need to keep on going with it, because you can't just be innovative for the month of March. You need to do it continuously. And the fourth thing that I wanted to talk about is diffusion and scaling of ideas. Recently, I was at a brilliant presentation from some ONS colleagues. And they were talking about how the UK is brilliant at R&D, but we're less good at diffusing great ideas through the economy. And it really struck me, because I'm on a sort of government-wide scale, in my position leading modernisation reform. I'm really struck sometimes when I'm talking to people from different departments. They're all doing amazing things, but they don't necessarily know about people in their departments that are doing similar things, let alone in other departments. So how can we get better at sharing all this great practice and just stealing ideas across the patch?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to briefly tell you about the Grassroots Innovation Practice project, known as GRIP, which is a great example of empowerment, innovation, and collaboration led and delivered by lower junior grade civil servants with the support of senior leaders. The GRIP project team had civil service colleagues from 5 government departments across Wales. The head of innovation, strategy and policy for the Welsh Government gave the team the project brief, which was to create a community of practice for innovation leads to facilitate innovation, new ways of working, sharing, which you've just talked about, and collaboration across government departments and agencies. We decided the best way to interpret the brief was to create a community of practice for lower grade staff across the civil service to help them innovate and progress, to get out of their box. Hence the project name, Grassroots Innovation Practice, GRIP. We decided to organize and deliver 2 Microsoft Teams events to launch GRIP across the civil service. The first event was entitled My Grassroots Professional Development Journey, where a deputy director from the Ministry of Justice Finance was interviewed on his career progression story. For the second event, I wanted someone who could share their experience of empowering frontline staff to champion organizational change. Matt King, formerly PwC's UK transformation leader, had recently joined the DVLA as a non-executive director. To me, this looked like a great opportunity to get some top-level private sector experience and ideas injected more widely into the civil service. I decided the best way to reach Matt was to email Julie Leonard, the chief executive of the DVLA. Don't ask, don't get. That's been said this morning already. After engaging a few emails with Julie, she connected me to Matt, who kindly agreed to be interviewed for the next event under the heading Grassroots Transformation and Change in the Civil Service. Matt's core message at the event was this: to deliver strategic organizational change, senior leaders must engage directly with frontline junior staff, invest in them, train them, empower them, and make them champions to lead and implement the change the leaders want. Matt's message went out to 140 civil servants from around 30 government departments, all done without a budget. What the GRIP project demonstrated is that lower grade staff, when empowered by senior leaders, can develop and deliver innovative ideas that can catalyze change across the civil service. So my call today is, let them out of their box. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As it says on the board, I'm here from the Department for Levelling Up, and we're doing something completely different at DLUC. So we have an initiative, very aptly named Innovation Squads, which is inspired by private companies like Amazon and their hackathon-style events. So what's an innovation squad? Well, we take 6 colleagues from across the department who don't know each other, all from different disciplines, who have never worked together before, and for a 6-week period, they're empowered to look at all the problem spaces that they can identify. So have they got a particular process that they've encountered that they think is really slow? Is there a problem that they've always found with the civil service? So we get them together, and for 50% of their time, over 6 weeks, they're empowered to try and solve these problems. In our mission statement, we encourage them to be positively disruptive, to look at all the different areas, and we're incredibly fortunate that we are sponsored by our senior civil service. So our sponsor for our first innovation squad in July was our CFO, Matt Thurston. And one of the great things about having our senior leaders on board is that not only are they providing the inspiration through their words to our 6 people, they're also there to unblock any issues that our 6 innovation squad members may face. So when something normally takes 4 weeks, can it take 4 days if you've got the backing of the CFO? How far can we push things? How quick can we solve these problems? So we did our first innovation squad last year in July, and the results far exceeded our expectations when you empower staff to go out there and to solve problems. To make a long story very short, our first innovation squad actually concluded with 2 proof of concepts for an AI chatbot and a PVA chatbot in Microsoft Teams to support colleagues across the department to get answers to HR queries quicker. So we tried to replicate this success. This concluded in January. Actually, in this time next week, I'm presenting the findings of our second innovation squad to the board. Again, we've surpassed expectations. It's not always plain sailing, it's not always easy, but it is important. And just to conclude and to bring it back to the question today, innovation is a mindset. And I've stolen that from the government efficiency framework that says efficiency is a mindset. But what do we mean when we keep saying mindset and we keep hearing this over and over again? Well, for me, what it means is we are going beyond simply providing our colleagues with the best digital tool or the best digital solution. That's where it starts. What we mean by mindset, to me in my role, is 3 things. So firstly, it's looking at the ways of working. Are we doing those most efficiently as we possibly can? Do we need to change them? Secondly, structures. Do we need to embed new structures into the way we do things? And thirdly, a phrase that we've probably heard lots of times today and will tomorrow is culture change. And the only way we can do any kind of culture change is slowly, incrementally, over time, and putting people at the heart of that and reminding ourselves that we're all people behind these laptops. And if you provide the space and structure, people will innovate. And that's what I see as my role as a collaborations manager.
Good job.
How do I follow that? I totally agree. Fundamentally, permission is about moving from can we to we can. And so the mindset is really pivotal. I know there's whole sessions about permission, but one of the things I really want to say is actually there's a huge amount of agency that we can bring ourselves. And so I just want to unpack 3 principles in my 3 minutes just to talk to you about those. I think there's a really interesting relationship between fit, risk, and trust. If you come out and you're saying, I want to go left in terms of fit, and the organization's going right, you might do it, but good luck, because the overarching current is one way. If you ask for something that's relatively high risk, you might get it, but it's going to be a lot easier if it's smaller and it's more risky. And some of that is because the people giving the permission they need to protect the organization and they need to protect you. So if something blows up, that someone's going to say, why on earth did you let this happen? What about this risk? Which is why trust, picking up what Kirsten was saying earlier on, trust is absolutely paramount. And a lot of that, I think, is built over time just by who we are, just often in the small things. Often in the small things. So I think there's a really interesting thing around if your proposal is aligned really well. So to give a quick example, when I pitched the Skyrim's innovation space, the then cabinet secretary was talking about how we can work across silos and how we can convene people differently, and actually framing the offer around a place to bring people together as a means to deliver what he was trying to do. I mean, it was fantastic. He championed it. He really backed it. And so there's something about fit. In terms of unlocking it, I've found this a really useful tool. Yes, if. So in all the kind of little chats you're having along the way, like, could we do this, or what about the other, how's it going to work? Yes, if is what I always really listen out for. Because if you get yes, but, not going to, you've got a bit more exploring to do. But yes, if, the if is, you can then see, are you going to be able to deliver the if? And if you can, you've probably got a green light. And if you can't, then that's part of your answer. So yes, if, not yes, but or and. Yes, if, I think for me, is a real magic phrase. And finally, just picking up what Gareth was saying, I'd really encourage you to, and the mindset point that Sarah was talking about, think big, start small, and then scale strong. You've got to have a big ambition, invariably, to have this sense of kind of dynamism and drive to push you through. But you want to start small, because if you start big, it becomes a right old mess really quickly, and it just diversifies all your resource and effort. I've just got to give a quick shout out here. My brilliant director, Zane Denton, at the Government Legal Department where I work, we were on a project last year, and he was saying, what is the cheapest, easiest, fastest, least risky way we can make an impact? And it's a pretty good framework. So think big, start small, and then once you've worked it out, scale from a position of strength. Joe.
Thank you so much, Rupert. Excellent reflections from the panel there. I think we're now going to open up to the floor. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I can see 1 and 2. Roving Mike will come over, and there we go. We'll go from there first of all.
Just a quick question for the panel. What hints and tips can you share with us civil servants who come up against leaders who block or inhibit innovative opportunities?
Could we repeat that?
Can you give any examples of times that, or practical tips when you come up with senior civil servants who perhaps block or inhibit attempts to be innovative? Would anyone like to take that one?
No?
Gareth?
Work for someone else.
I mean, change happens person by person, right? So I think you have to meet them where they are, and you have to speak. You've got to engage them, and you've got to educate without preaching, right? Educate without preaching, but show them that you can line up, to the point that Rupert just made. You need to understand what their agenda is and what they're trying to get done, and you can show how you can enable that. And so just hearing no, because that's not how we do it, you need to then take a step back, go back in there, maybe one-on-one, maybe not within a big group, maybe not at a Treasury Board meeting, maybe not like in a big steering committee, and sort of break down what they're worried about and then tackle it and seek their permission to show them and demonstrate that you can do it. And you may need to take a half a step back, but do not be deterred, right? Like you've got to go back in, because that system's got to change. And so be that change, right? But it's tackling it sometimes one person at a time.
I was being slightly flippant, but actually I meant it. I think the thing is, I'm sort of assuming you've tried all the things that Kirsten has tried. You made a great comment earlier about culture. So one of the most innovative companies I worked for as I was a junior manager, the rules there on money and spend were really, really tight. I mean, this was like a million years ago, but I had to bid for money in 10 grand increments. But the rule was, if you didn't get a response from the person you were asking, and they didn't get from their boss, in 2 days, you were absolutely required to crack on anyway. Now imagine that in our world. If we had that sort of culture, then you wouldn't have to ask the sort of the question, and that you wouldn't have the frustration that you have. We'd all feel just a lot more empowered, because that is just setting a tone where we want to innovate, we want to do things quickly. And I think there's just a lot, to that, about how the pace that those of us who are more senior leaders should set in the organisation. Take a decision quickly, because if it's no, but you take it quickly, well, that's annoying, but okay. But if we take decisions quickly, then that just builds the things that Rupert was talking about. I think everyone else was talking about as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gareth. We had a question in the middle here, this gentleman.
First of all, thank you. It was all very interesting. Maybe it tags on to what you just talked about. How do we build the resilience for long-haul innovation? I mean, my observation is, if you try innovation in the public sector, there's two things that happen. One of them is, we tried that 20 years ago, it didn't work. And the other one is that, the next election's coming up, so we have to pick some low-hanging fruit first. And there are some innovations that probably in these times we desperately need that may expand beyond one election cycle. So how do we build sort of more, as I said, long-haul innovation? How do we do that?
I think it's Sapna.
I think it's, I recognise the problem. I think it's about evidence base. So one of the things that we've tried to do in the UK government over the last few years is we've established the evaluation task force to take 10 areas where we don't have very good evidence, but we spend a lot of money, and that we need to put in programs for the long term. So how can we create a really robust evidence base of what we think works, or a range of ideas that work, and experiment in that space in order to bring sort of comfort to the Treasury in making spending decisions. So I do think that there's something about what information are we collecting on the need and the need to invest over the long term, and how are we building the coalition of the willing? I know that this is something that the Department for Work and Pensions has been really good at. A lot of the universal credit transformation has happened because they built over many years a coalition of the willing around spending to make that transformation happen.
Gareth, did you want to come in?
Yeah, it comes back. It's a great question. It comes back, I think, to what I was saying about portfolio. So if we look at all of our innovation projects as a portfolio, as long as some are landing each year, what we're looking for is for a portfolio as a whole to pay off and be worth it as a whole. So your project that is taking longer, you need colleagues who've got other projects that are landing in a shorter frame. The only reason that your ask is problematic is that it implies that there's a gap between now and your project coming. But if there's other things landing in the meanwhile, then that problem slightly goes away. I know that's not a perfect answer. We've got to get used to this idea of looking at this as in the round within your department, and perhaps if they're big projects, across government as well.
Mm-hmm.
Kirsten, did you want to come in?
Just really quickly, I think the way that our funding works needs to be adjusted to also address your question there. So we're typically used to we're funding projects, they're a capital expenditure, we do them and then they finish, yet you need to continue on and on and on, right? And so looking at our operational budgets and making sure that there's innovation and continuous improvement built into operations, not as a special project that you have to go outside and get funding for, but as an expectation that that's going to be something that we keep doing, and that a project never actually ends, right? Like we are forever innovating a function or a capability. So thinking about it from a long-term operations approach when we're funding, I think needs to be adjusted as well.
Thanks, Kirsten. Any other questions from the floor? We've got a couple this side. This lady.
Thank you. You talked about the importance of fit, and it's quite common when talking about change or challenging to align those ideas. How do you bring up and discuss when the visions and strategies and alignments all say we're talking about innovation, but actually, when it comes down to the cold, hard decision-making, tactical, reactive decisions is what you're left with? And there's a gap there between what we want to achieve and what we're doing, and the more that happens, the bigger it gets. So if anyone's got any tips on how to challenge that, highlight that, fix that, be great.
Thank you. And then do we want to tag on a question here at the front row as well, please?
Thank you.
Can you raise your hand again?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tuba from the Government Digital Service. Thank you to the panel for all your really interesting insights. So I would just like to know what I think, especially in the UK government context, what our panel thinks about what our leaders are doing well and what they can do to improve in creating that environment of psychological safety that Kirsten referred to.
Thank you. So I think the first question there talks to the mismatch, perhaps, to the rhetoric of we're going to have a culture of innovation, but it not being felt on the ground. So how do we implement that? And the second talks to how do we actually implement a culture of psychological safety? What does that mean for staff? So perhaps, is there anyone who wants to, Burning, take that? Rupert?
Let me kick off on the fit question, because I think it's a really important one. I mean, there's an element of pragmatism, isn't there? Depending on who's in your corner as you're pitching this idea. If it's a grassroots thing, that's one thing. If it's a new ministerial idea, that's another. So there's a bit of pragmatism. I think also, picking up what Sapna was saying, maybe there are kind of two approaches. One is about timing. It's like yes, but not now. And I often think, MP3s were around in about 1999, and the iPod, arrived with a flourish in the early 2000s, and Spotify gets listed in 2018. So there is something about market in any situation. There's something about market timing, and it doesn't necessarily follow. It can still be a brilliant idea, but it might not be for right now. And just picking up your point earlier on, I do think there's something about using whatever the situation is. There is a mindset point, picking up what Sarah was saying. There's a mindset point about how you can use it to your advantage. If it's not now, what can you bank at a later point? The alternative is to do something which picks up what Sapna was saying about the kind of evidence approach, which is actually, okay, but is there a way in which, in a kind of, this is the classic skunk works thing, right? In a kind of quiet place tucked away, you can actually just try it, and actually you can start to nurture your evidence base, because then you're going to be in a much stronger position to actually make the case for it. I still think there's something about the overarching direction of travel, because ultimately we are in a big organization. And I saw this, I was working for a startup accelerator for Telefonica, and it's not just a public sector thing. There was an element of we've got this brilliant thing, and as we kind of fed it into the people at kind of HQ in what seemed like very glamorous Madrid, they were saying, that's great, but that's not the direction we're going. So I do think there's something about fit, about timing, and about scale. Since I'm just picking up your question, I think often it's interesting to see kind of leaders backing innovation at different levels. When I was really pleased to pitch to the Cabinet Office Accelerator and win it a few years back. And at the deputy director level, my deputy director then, Andrea Siebmock, was outstanding. She was running Policy Lab. She'd come in new to government. And actually, when I was thinking about it, her steer about do this, don't do that, let that one go, push after the other, was really invaluable. And actually, even at the top of the office, I know this is a few years ago, but the then chief exec, John Manzoni, he really stuck his neck out, actually. Yeah, so when we launched this thing, he said, yeah, I'll come, I'll launch it. And And then that brings a different pressure because you then can't screw it up, right? Because he's going to be there. But that's quite a good driver to make sure that other people kind of get in behind your program. I would also just add, and I'm not on the payroll for this, but I do think in terms of fronting it, I think it's really impressive what Alex was setting out this morning, and even actually in the kind of setting out conferences like this. We didn't have this like how many years ago. So I know it's kind of bleeding obvious because we're all sitting here, but I do think actually kudos to Alex and the people around him as they've kind of blazed a trail for this.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, can I just come in on the psychological safety point, which is a really good question. And as it probably sounded from my introduction, I don't have that problem at the moment from a leadership perspective. We're very fortunate. But as we're starting in the innovation squad, part of my role is to help facilitate them. And I have a product manager and a delivery manager with me. And often the question they'll ask me on day one is, what if we fail? What do we do? Like, what if we spend all our time and energy exploring this idea and it doesn't work? Like, that's going to be a failure. And I'm like, that's not a failure. That we're going to learn from that. And I always say to them, I was like, there's only two things I can't help you with and that I see as a failure. And that is if you don't show up and if you don't care, because I can't make you attend and I can't make you care. But anything else that we explore is going to be a lesson learned. And I think that's really important. Just to pick up on an earlier question that you said about the longevity and the forward planning, I guess the benefit of not being a director sat here on the stage is that I get to say that I'm not thinking that far ahead. And that is by design, that's on purpose, because I want to be responsive to the people that I'm dealing with. So I am thinking ahead, but not as far ahead as our directors are thinking. So I think your question as well was really good, because you were talking about this fantastic words, but what are we actually doing? So we've got the statements and we've got the visions. How are we putting them into place? And I think that's something else that we need to be having more and more conversations and explorations about. Yeah, I'll end it there and pass on to somebody else.
Sapna, and then Gareth.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on a couple of points that were made. So I think there's something about jump on bandwagons, whatever the bandwagon is, and meeting people where they are, jump on it, because at the moment, productivity is a big game in town, right? If you want to experiment, if you want to put forward new proposals to the Treasury, they're first of all going to come back and say, there's no more money. If you can convince them that this is an idea that drives productivity, drives efficiency, there's always the possibility of something. And then second, figure out who your influencers are. So your Treasury connection, your CFO, bring them into the tent, ask them for their ideas. They might pretend they might not want to be, but they want to be innovative, they want to be creative because they want to solve the problem too, but maybe don't always have time, access to the same ideas, data, information that you've got. So figure out who you can bring with you. And to your great question about what are our leaders doing well and what could they do better, I think that in the last couple of years, we've seen a really big shift in kind of our PermSec, DG community in their understanding and embracing of technology. And I think that should be sort of celebrated. I appreciate there's a ways to go on that. I think that where we could all do better, to the point you were making about picking your bets, I think that senior leaders are having to be pragmatic and they're not always doing a great job of explaining why they're saying no to one thing and putting their political capital behind something else. And if they could be a bit more transparent about that, that'd be really handy. And then second, learning culture. So this thing about failing, I think because people are worried about things turning up in newspapers or being sort of vindicated for wasting public money. We're not always that honest in doing wash-up, saying we learned these lessons from this thing that didn't go really well. And I think that probably in the private sector culture, there's a little bit more, not always, but there's a little bit more scope for that. And I think that public sector leaders need to figure out the right conversation to have about having sort of open conversations about failure and learning lessons.
Gareth, did you have time?
Yes, a very quick thing. The psychological safety thing this is the question, isn't it? I mean, this is where it's at. So I think maybe to throw something back to Sarah, maybe we should just build a network of senior leaders who are prepared to sponsor projects and who are prepared to, if it goes wrong, 8 out of 10 will, that's fine, to stand up and say, brilliant. You gave it a good go. It failed, but you gave it your best shot. Try again. And I think, Musk is clearly, let's not go there, as an interesting character. But that tape of when his first rocket blew up, there must have been 500 million, maybe $1 billion that cost him. He was straight on the X saying, we learned a lot, we go again. So the message that team would have got from that, who must have been feeling really shit. I mean, they'd just blown this thing up and they made it 100 yards into the air. But what a message. And I think if we can get a collection of senior leaders who are prepared to, support the failures and say, brilliant, let's go again, then I think that'll change the tonality quite quickly.
Thank you, Gareth. I just wanted to come in on a couple of the points that Rupert, Sarah, and James have made. And it's quite obvious that if you have the backing of the top brass in your organization, you're going to get the oomph behind it and get the initiative done. But perhaps a lot of people in the room can emphasize with the kind of sticky layer at middle management, who are often going to be getting all the requests from staff to have the support for initiative. They themselves feel the weight of the responsibility of their managers. And so what would you say on this side of the panel to your middle managers saying, I'm getting all these requests for quite radical experimentary projects. I don't feel like I can say yes. And what would this side of the panel say to they keep on saying no to me. I don't feel like I need to go above them, but James, that's what you had to do. You had to go to the CEO. So how do we kind of balance this conundrum?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things. One, we need to invest in the development of those leaders. So we need to help them model the right behaviors. I think they need to be urged to take a prioritization approach. So if they're getting 50 requests, they can't deal with 50 requests, but maybe, to Gareth's point before, each of them needs a portfolio, and then they need to be held accountable for forwarding that. And so their role is to be held accountable for the success of the folks underneath them, as opposed to almost anything else, right? So if we help change their accountabilities to make them feel like they're not the no people, but they're the enablement layer, and they can't get it all right, but they need to take a portfolio approach, and then invest in them, because the skills that got them to that level are probably not the skills that they're going to need now to be a different kind of leader. So we can't expect a miracle if we don't put some dollars into investing in developing that layer, quite frankly. And there'll be some of them that just need to get out of the way. And we have to be able to pick those too and not put too much energy into trying to turn somebody into something that they're not. So.
Completely agree. Samna?
Just to go back, one of my opening remarks was about being holistic, and just to build on what you were saying, I think that we need to ensure that our managers feel ready to do this. So for UK civil servants, look out this year, we'll be focusing on line management capabilities and how we build up our line managers across the civil service. Two, we need to reward people that take risks. So as line managers, in your performance conversations with your line managees, how are you rewarding people for taking risk or calculated risk for doing that? And then watch out, there'll be sort of a lot of activity in the innovation mission this year, where we'll be supporting line managers' teams to work together to make changes. And again, we'll be really thinking about the skills, the incentives, and celebrating everybody that's actually making change happen. But I do think it has to be holistic.
Thanks, Emily. Do you want to give your closing comment, Rupert?
Just very quickly, picking up your point about what happens when you're blocked in the middle of the middle management piece. It was really interesting. A few years ago, we set up the Cabinet Office Policy School. It's a kind of hackathon for a week, and it was basically going to be training for people for 5 days. And what was really interesting, and the point I really want to illustrate is, what was interesting was to get to the real issue. So the real issue we were facing wasn't anything to do with the quality of the training offer. The real issue was culturally, I was in the Cabinet Office, culturally at that point, to be away from your desk for 5 days was not the way you got ahead. So by being quite specific and really focusing on it. We flipped it and we were like, okay, so what do we have to do to make people want to be away from their desk for 5 days? How do you flip that? And the reason that's relevant is because we created something which was basically, we ended up with a fantastic offer. We had brilliant speakers and it was a really good approach. But the directors were then thinking, I'm so pleased that Charlotte's not at her desk this week, because that means that she's on this brilliant course, and that must reflect really well on me. So there's something about really digging in. I know it's the kind of classic user focus, but really digging in as to why the person's saying no, and how can you flip the offer to actually make them want to come around, to make them want to say yes. Joe.
Thank you, Rupert. Gareth, I know you wanted to come in quickly.
Yeah, I just flipped this all around. If you think about what needs to be true to do something, you're inviting people to say no, stop me, rather than yes, allow me. And I think if you flip that around when you're asking for permission to do projects, I think you put the onus on your boss to stop you, and then why would they do that? So, and I think we should take great encouragement. This event is fantastic. COVID, is ghastly, but we got out of the COVID experience. That's something we've never done before. So on the ventilator program and on vaccines, we not deliberately wasted. On the ventilator project, we spent 350 million in a few short weeks. 150 million of that was completely wasted in that it was on projects that didn't work. Vaccines, we spent, bigger numbers than that on developing vaccines that didn't turn out to work, but we got some that did. So net, huge success. The NAO were very happy, and in terms of, worried about, failure, that a lot of that comes down to the NAO. The NAO were very positive of both projects. And actually, on the way here, the NAO guy who sort of marks my homework, I saw him leaving. He said, "Oh God, it's really great. It's been a fantastic, fantastic event." So if the NAO is starting to think that innovation is a good thing, with all the risks that come with it, then I think we're on a good road.
Can you quickly say for non-UK civil servants what the NAO is?
Oh, sorry, the National Audit Office. Sorry, yeah. The national, who inspect public spending and are normally very critical and don't want to do anything that the NAO might criticise you for. But if the NAO were positive about those two programmes that where we spent a lot of money that didn't go anywhere and is getting that innovation is part of what we should do, then great.
I completely agree. And thank you so much, Gareth, and the rest of the panelists. I'm just going to really quickly play back my 3 key takeaways from I think it's been a really rich conversation. I know we're at time. For me, it's the importance of funding and scaling. If we don't do that, I think it can be incredibly demoralizing for civil servants to come up with ideas and never have the money to do anything with it and see it come to fruition. Secondly, baking innovation into our processes and structures, into our incentives. Gareth, you spoke about the pipeline, and I think that's the way we need to think about something like this. And finally, we've spoken a lot about culture and tone. And at Kirsten and James, you spoke about the need to feel the pulse and the need for managers to be able to understand how their staff and teams are feeling. We need to normalize failure, and we need to market innovation when it happens. There's so many good ideas happening in the civil service, and I think leaders play a really key role in celebrating and rewarding that.